Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for the Asphalt Pavement Alliance webinar here on November 18th, 2025. Today, we'll be talking about stretching your agency dollars, tips, tricks, examples to maximize the spending, the limited budgets that you have on your roadway network. Just a couple pieces of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. So it will be next week, it'll be uploaded onto the APA's YouTube channel. So if you missed something or you'd like to go back in and re-listen to a section, that will be on the YouTube channel next week. And then those of you that are looking for PDH certificates, at the end of the presentation today, our final slide will have the specific PDH certificate for this presentation. You can screenshot that. I'll leave that up for a couple of moments while we get there. If you miss it, you can go back in and grab it again off the YouTube channel. So thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Mike Skinner and I'm the Executive Director for the Asphalt Pavement Alliance. And I am located in Denver, Colorado. The Asphalt Pavement Alliance is a national association alliance of our partners, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But let me just share a couple of highlights about where I live here in Denver. This is US 550. This is it's a scenic byway in Colorado. It's known as the $1 Million Highway, not because of the cost of construction, but because of the views. This is in the extreme southwest corner of Colorado, and it runs between Durango and Silverton and over to Ouray. It's beautiful. Ouray is known as the little Switzerland of the United States. It's a beautiful drive. But it can be kind of scary. As you can see here, there are no guardrails on the outside lane of this section of the $1 Million Highway. This is called Red Mountain Pass. So when you're in the picture coming traveling towards us, which would mean you'd be heading towards Durango, Colorado, it can be a little scary. It can be really scary in the wintertime. When the reason there are no guardrails on this portion of the $1 Million Highway is because this is the most active avalanche zone in Colorado. Right around the corner from this picture into the picture is the most active slide chute, and the Colorado Department of Transportation has actually had to build an avalanche tunnel because it slides so frequently. And when Red Mountain Pass closes, it creates about a 200-mile detour. You have to go around through Cortez and Telluride. So CDOT works very hard to keep Red Mountain Pass open year round. The reason the guardrails aren't there is because it makes it easier for snow removal. The plows can just shove the material right off the side of the highway there. When the guardrails are there, it's much more challenging to keep the highway open. Resilience is what we're talking about here. I'll highlight one other example of resilience. So in 1956, when President Eisenhower signed into act the Interstate Highway Act, which allowed Congress to provide funding to complete the interstate highway system around the country, at that time, I-70, if you wanted to continue west, stopped at Denver. If you wanted to continue on to Salt Lake City and on to California, you had to go through State Highway 40, etc. But the interstate didn't exist. Through the 1970s, the original alignment of I-70, you can see on the very bottom down here, was a two-lane road. That's the Colorado River. That's on the outside of the road. And then you have these beautiful vertical cliffs. This is Glenwood Canyon. It's about an 18-mile scenic segment of I-70, about 2 hours west of Denver. But that original alignment that you see down there on the bottom was one lane, each direction, with no shoulder. And that was the interstate highway that was carrying interstate cargo, traffic, and bicyclists. There was no shoulder there and there was no way around it. So it was a real mess to ride through Glenwood Canyon. So the way they had to improve Glenwood Canyon was they had to build this tier system because they were bound by the river on one side and these vertical cliffs on the other. So if you find yourself in Colorado, if you drive the $1 Million Highway, US 550, also try to find yourself, if you're traveling back to Denver, and make it a point to drive through Glenwood Canyon. It really is truly a spectacular sight for those 18 miles. But as we're talking about resilience, it also has its real challenges. You can see with these vertical cliffs, One of the biggest challenges in Glenwood Canyon is rockfall mitigation. And the canyon closes semi-regularly all year round because of materials that scale down off the cliffs. You can see these large boulders that came down and punched a hole through the decking on that elevated section there. So this is where CDOT really focuses on resiliency. How do they keep the canyon open as quickly or reopen as quickly as possible? Because just like Red Mountain Pass, when the canyon closes, it's about a 240-mile detour up and around through Steamboat Springs, etc., which is impacting interstate highways. So interesting, just a couple of highlights of Colorado and where I live and some of the scenic beauty that we have here, but some of the challenges that the DOT has to maintain their existing structure. This is a map that shows in blue the interstate highway system that we've been talking about. And then in your state, it also has the red, which are the state highway systems. So if you look at your specific state and happen to be where you're located right now, you'll see a combination of interstate and state highway system. You've heard the term before, and you've heard our industry talk about it. 94% of the roads in America are paved with asphalt. Is that just a marketing term, or where does that number come from? And I'll explain it to you where that number comes from. It's produced and it's tracked by the Asphalt Institute, our partners at the Asphalt Institute. Every year, the state DOTs submit a report to the Federal Highway Administration that shows how many lane miles they have that they're maintaining of interstate and non-interstate highway in their state and what they're surfaced with, asphalt, concrete, or unsurfaced if they're unpaved gravel roads, etc. And so the Asphalt Institute does a wonderful job of compiling all of that information from the Federal Highway Administration. They can calculate that and look at the total number of area that's paved across the United States and then take a look at that and track how much of that is asphalt. That's where that number comes from. It is not just a marketing tagline. It is truly representative of the network that we have across the country. Now, when you look at your individual state, that number may go a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower, but they all kind of hover in around that 94% with a couple of exceptions. The one that drops down significantly, at least on the interstate highway, is the state of Iowa. And they're down about under 70% for their total asphalt on their interstate highway system. But it's interesting to look at how our product and our industry is reflected across the nation's highways. And these are just at the state level. When we talk about the cities and the counties and the municipal work, that's even a higher number. And we'll talk about local agencies in a little bit when we get there. But let me give you just a little background about who we are, who is the Asphalt Pavement Alliance, and why do we exist. We are represented by a unified voice of our three partners, the National Asphalt Pavement Association, the Asphalt Institute, and the individual SAPAs. The SAPAs are the state asphalt pavement associations, and that's the 40 of them that exist and represent across the country. Each of those three associations have slightly different missions. They're promoting slightly different things. We live in the middle. The Asphalt Pavement Alliance, where they have overlap and where they have unified mission, that's where we live. And our role at the APA is to champion, support, and promote quality asphalt pavements. That overlap is much probably larger than you can see in this Venn diagram here, because all three of them, while we don't have the exact same mission, that is a core to all of these missions, is champion, support, and promote asphalt pavements. How do we do that? What do we do when you say promote quality in asphalt pavements? It's technical excellence. Our technical director, Dr. Buzz Powell, is our technical director, our awards program, and our education and outreach. That's what we're doing right now, our education and outreach. Our awards program, I just want to share an example. This is a fun example from our Perpetual Pavement Awards program. So many of you in your cities and your counties or at your DOTs across the country, your state asphalt pavement associations, most of them have an awards program recognizing last year's or this season's quality and construction programs. And those are very successful. It's an integral part of what a trade association does is recognition of quality through an awards program. And we are no different at the Asphalt Pavement Alliance, except that our awards are different in nature. We are recognizing perpetual pavements, meaning that these are pavements that have been in existence and operating at a minimum of 35 years before they can qualify for a perpetual pavement award. And it also means that within that 35 years, they have not had a structural failure on the roadway. It can have received regular and ongoing maintenance, as it well should. It can receive mill and overlays, and it can increase in capacity, but it can't increase in a structural section more than 4 inches. So that means over the 35 years, if you're in a rural segment like this, you can't have more than two-inch overlays. This is a segment of the original Route 66 south of Albuquerque. It was submitted as part of the 2024 perpetual program. It met the criteria, and it has now been awarded a perpetual pavement award. This is the first time the New Mexico Department of Transportation has been awarded. They were very excited about it. But what's exciting is that, as I mentioned, these roads have to be a minimum of 35 years old. This segment of Route 66 was built in 1928. It's almost 100 years old. I was down there just a month and a half ago when we gave the presentation to the New Mexico Transportation Commission. They were very proud of this. So this is what we do as recognizing perpetual pavements when they're built correctly and they're maintained correctly. We've got a segment of road here of the Mother Road running through New Mexico that is almost 100 years old. So congratulations to the New Mexico Department of Transportation. Let's get to our topic about how do you stretch your dollars and how do we move forward? Why does asphalt dominate road construction? I showed that statistic earlier. One of the things that we like to talk about at the Asphalt Pavement Alliance is the case and stories that we share are data driven. So we're not just coming up with a talking point, but why do we truly dominate the industry at 94%? Here's a couple of talking points that are probably reflective in your local agency or your DOT. Our initial cost of construction versus the concrete paving industry is when you look at 40-year life cycle cost analysis and you factor in initial cost of construction, ongoing maintenance, projected maintenance, and you bring all those costs back to present day costs. Typically, what is driving the decision is initial cost of construction. 95% of the time, the asphalt option is the cheaper option. So what will happen with capital improvement projects or your annual overlay programs or your preservation programs is you may have developed an engineer's estimate, put it out for bid, and as part of the procurement process, although all of those bids come in over estimate. We're going to talk about that in a little while, about some opportunities, how to address that. But what do you do as an agency when all of those come in to think, well, then you have to go back in and you make some adjustments. But usually, typically, what's in those situations, what drives the decision at that point is initial cost of construction. And in the asphalt industry, we're on the right side of the ledger there 95% of the time. We're also seeing some significant trends in streamline of specifications. What do I mean by that? We're seeing a national, the needle and the spectrum is shifting with the implementation of balanced mix design. Some of you might not be familiar with that or BMD, so I'll give you a quick 30-second overview of what balanced mix design is. When the super pave methodology was implemented and developed in the late 1980s and then implemented through the 90s and the 2000s, that methodology was designed to address rutting. We wanted to make rut-resistant mixes. So they're very rut-resistant. But that in doing so, there were some consequences that we increased rutting resistance at the potential of not maximizing crack resistance. So they're very rut resistant now, but they are premature or can be premature susceptible to cracking. So that's where the concept of balanced mix design comes from. How do we move that spectrum back a little bit? without sacrificing quality, how do we maintain rut resistance but increase crack resistance? And there's a lot of different states are doing this different ways. And that's a whole nother topic for another discussion. But that's where we talk about streamlining specifications. That whole implementation of balanced mix design, there is a movement across the industry to simplify that process and streamline that process, because the simpler and the easier it is to implement it, the quicker it will implement, and the better we're going to get results in a quick and timely fashion. So if your state, or if you're already hearing about balanced mix design, kudos to your DOT and what they're doing and how that message is trickling down to the cities and the counties. Materials innovation. There's not a silver bullet out there in our industry. We, as a construction material, we all have to deal with maximizing performance, but there are also challenges with ongoing maintenance. There are, and I'll mention a topic here a little bit earlier, the state of Utah, the neighbor just to the west here in Colorado, has really embraced the concept of highly modified asphalt and what they're doing with their DOT and implementing that. While I wouldn't call it a silver bullet, they have figured out a way to increase their service life. They're saying up to 40% at relatively the same cost as an SMA for their interstate highway systems. Again, that's a whole other topic for another subject. I just wanted to briefly mention it, that there are some innovative materials that are out there, and we will continue to promote those. So look for those topics in future webinars here at the APA. The last thing that I'd like to mention, at least on the trend side of things, is concrete maintenance. So this has been well documented by NCAT, the National Center for Asphalt Technology, the test track that they have in Auburn University down there in Alabama. And that inflection point for maintenance occurs at 25 years for concrete pavements. So it's not further out as can be advertised or promoted for where you find in different segments. But the inflection point, meaning what is the inflection point? Meaning the ROI, where the continued maintenance costs begin to outweigh the expected life performance. That inflection point targeted is well documented and researched at 25 years now. So I just want to put that out there and share with that. So funding trends. When I go and visit with an agency, a local agency, a DOT, our discussions, regardless of what we start our discussion talking about, it invariably always ends up talking about funding. So what I've done is flip that paradigm around a little bit. Let's talk about funding first, and then we'll talk about the implementations and how you can address with that. At the federal level, this is Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy, and he's saying some things that are very favorable to our industry. He's saying, let's get the Department of Transportation, let's get the Federal Highway Administration back to basics. We should be doing 4 things at the federal level: building roads, building bridges, maintaining roads, and maintaining bridges. And that is the focus of what he is trying to implement, and how that will trickle down through the Federal Highway Administration and to your individual DOT. Well, at the state level, where that trickle down effect, that's a different story. Some of that message gets lost in translation. Here's a great example of what's happening in Arizona. Their Department of Transportation, this is a quote from their Flagstaff division. They said, we're not in pavement preservation mode here. And they're talking about the interstate highway system. We're in pavement life support. They are in trouble, and they're really struggling in Arizona. And I can imagine almost all of you that are on the call today, whether you be at a city, a county, or a DOT, probably relate with that comment right there, that you find yourself in that similar situation. Hence, that's why you're on our presentation today. And what is this all turning into is ultimately that we're seeing program delivery is down across the country. What do I mean by program delivery? I'll share that in the next slide or so. A couple of other trends before we get into specifics about this. Industry consolidation across the country is leading to diversification. What do I mean by that? I mean large companies, medium-sized companies, and even small mom and pop companies, as they grow, the common model is growth through acquisition. So big companies are buying smaller companies or merging with similar companies, and it's changing the business model of their original company. Meaning, if you're a producer or a contractor and you buy a striping company, you're now in the striping business in addition to your core business. Or you buy a milling company, or you buy a preservation company or a recycling company. That's what I talk about. Consolidation. Growth through acquisition is leading to diversification, and the business models are changing, and that is having an impact on industry. Everybody is becoming a little more diversified and doing more of different things. Innovation, I mentioned that a few minutes ago, that highly modified asphalt, and the success that the state of Utah is having with that. There are a couple of other DOTs around the country very closely monitoring what is happening in Utah, and the success that they're having there. I'll wrap up our trends discussion with one of my favorite quotes: progress, not perfection. So when we're done talking with this today, and I shared some examples about how you can stretch your dollars, if you're going to take these examples back to your agency and try to implement them, my comment here is implement it tomorrow. Don't wait till the end of the next construction season where you have to develop the program and you have to get 100% right. 70% is good enough. And I don't mean that by impacting quality, because quality is the key and the core of our industry. What I mean when I say 70% is good enough is 70% is good enough to get a program started. Get the program started, whether it be implementation of a material, changing or updating your specifications, your inspection program, choose whatever element you would like, but get your program started at 70%. It's good enough, because once you get it implemented, you can continue to refine it. You can continue, it will continue to evolve, and it will get better and better as you go through. But if you wait till your program that you feel is perfectly implementable, you might lose a construction season, you might lose a year, you might lose 5 years waiting to dial in that program. So get started, and 70% is good enough to get started. So funding, let me share just a couple of slides. The numbers here are not important. What I want you to look at is the trend, what I have highlighted there in red. Now this happens to be state funding for the DOT, for Indiana, the DOT. And what I want you to notice here is the funding trend doesn't change. It's about $252 million annually projected out to 2045. That flatline spending, that the DOT, the Highway Commission, is not planning to adjust up or adjust down. It's the erosion of the buying power of that dollar. That's the point I'm trying to make here. This is just one example in Indiana. If you're at a DOT, you might be shaking your head going, yep, that's exactly what we're dealing with in my state or my city or my county. These are real problems, stagnant funding. So how can we put that in perspective? If you take your agency's budget that you're going to spend this year, or 2026, your construction budget, let's call that your asphalt budget. That would include your annual program, your resurfacing program, if you do mill and overlay, if you do preservation, if you do recycling, if you do maintenance, you do crack sealing. Put all of that together and call that your asphalt program. If you take that total budget and you divide that number for one specific season by the total number of lane miles, not center line, but lane miles that you have to maintain for your agency, whether it be city, state, or county, you'll come up with this number that I'm showing here, $1 per lane mile. This is an interesting metric that you can use to compare yourself to other states, other cities, other counties about how are we doing? Are we above the curve? Are we below the curve? Or are we way off? Where are we? So here in Indiana, they're spending close to $9,000 per lane mile. That number on its own doesn't give us any reference point. So let's look at a couple of others. Colorado, they're spending about the same, close to that $255 million annually on their surface treatment program, but they have a slightly smaller network in lane miles. But the order of magnitude is similar here, $9,000, $11,000. Go down to the state of Florida, things start to change. That's because they have a tolling system in Florida, but they're spending 4 times per lane mile than they are in Indiana. Florida is being very successful in managing their network right now. Part of that success is because the tolling that they have down there. When you take your family to go visit Mickey Mouse in Orlando, they realize that a significant portion of the tolls are paid by out-of-state visitors that are coming to visit Orlando and go to Walt Disney World and the theme parks that are down there. So the state residents there have a tolerance for tolling. But around the country, there are lots of states that have a tolling program, and that's an interesting discussion about the tolerance and that funding mechanism of where it goes forward. But the point I'm trying to show here is develop this metric. If you're managing your agency's program, this is a simple back of the napkin calculation. And if you are your asset manager for an agency, or if you're a consultant where you do this type of work privatized for an agency, you should know these numbers. And it's such a simple calculation to calculate these and ask these. Then, when you're engaging with your elected officials at your cities or your counties or your transportation commission, these are interesting talking points to help you with your messaging. Local agencies, cities and counties highlighted the two extremes here in the photograph, but that's a county road, beautiful county road in northern Colorado, and that's downtown Denver on the left, an extreme of your public works department. But challenges that we're seeing at the local agencies, and we're seeing at the state too, but we're just focusing on local agencies right now, is grappling with that continued critical services while their purchasing power has eroded. What do I mean by that? I showed you that statistic in Indiana with static, no growth projected for 20 years through 2045 for their program, with increasing and escalating costs, but static budgets. That's the eroding buying power of the dollar that you have. So how do you stretch that? How do you maximize that? How do you manage that in your agency? How do you move forward? Here's an example of just how dramatic that erosion looks like. This is the construction cost index. That's a measure of inflation. You can see it changes significantly around COVID when we were dealing with supply chain issues, and we see no end in sight. It's continuing to elevate every year. So add this multiplier to that static budget, and I'm already telling you, you already know the problem that you have at your specific industry or agency, excuse me. Here's another set of example of some dollars, and it's really critical to get an understanding of how impactful this is. We all know that, but how can you message the impact to your elected officials, the people who are making the decisions about what these budgets are going to look like? We talked about that dollar per lane mile at the fed or at the state level. Here it is at the agency level. Colorado is the only state that I know of that tracks this kind of data for cities and counties across the state, but they have they send out a survey every year. So there's remember what I was calling our asphalt budget. They take that and divide that by the total number of lane miles, and that's why they come up with that purple number. That's the dollar per lane mile for a local agency across the state. Now you'll see a huge spread in some of those numbers. Look at Federal Heights down there. They're spending $42,000 per lane mile. Is that part of their regular funding in the program? No way. Where you see some of these very large numbers is that means that the city or the county probably has recently either adopted a new bond funding measure or a tax increase where they're having dedicated dollars promoted back to their city street program. But the average number, when you take out the high flyers, is about $7,000 per lane mile. It's not that far off some of those numbers that we saw at the state level. It passes the smell test where we start to get a feel for what agencies are spending. This is my favorite bumper sticker. Keeping the good roads good. Local agency best practices is minimize your deferred maintenance and minimize your backlog. Let's talk about deferred maintenance first, and I'm going to share a case study of an agency that didn't do this and the black hole that they had to dig themselves out of. But minimizing backlog is another key metric. It's another back of the napkin calculation that you can develop for your agency, and you should know the answer to this. What is backlog? The way I define backlog is it's how much of your network as a percentage is in a total reconstruct category. So think about that in asset management perspective. We could talk about it in a PCI score or an OCI score or RSL, remaining service life. If you're at zero, it's the segment of your roadway that are no longer good candidates for minor rehabilitation, major rehabilitation. They are candidates for reconstruction. You don't want to spend good money on those roads until you're going to reconstruct them. That is the definition of a backlog. So if you calculate the total size of your network and how much of your roadway is in that criteria, the backlog, general rule of thumb is an agency, if you have more than 15% of your network in backlog condition, you are not going to get out of that hole at your current funding level. That's the trigger, at your current funding level. So if you track your backlog, and I know agencies that here in Colorado that have over 40% backlog, and it's really nightmare situations. So what I'm sharing with you is develop these metrics. Before we even talk about how to fix these things, how to stretch these things, you need to know the true and accurate condition of your network that you're managing. So know the asset value, know your backlog condition, know what you're spending dollar per lane mile. If you have these metrics, then you can compare them to other states. You can compare them to other agencies, your next door neighbor. How are they doing? How are you doing? It gives you an independent data point to continue that discussion. I always say you can't fill a hole if you don't know, number one, where it is and how deep it is. So this is what we're talking about here is the inventory and the condition assessment before you even try to develop your plan to fix things. Know how bad it is, first of all. So best practice, maximize flexibility in your program delivery. And there's a couple of things here when I say flexibility. Here's an example of a public works director for the city of Centennial, which is in the Denver metro area. And they have a rollover contract for their annual mill and overlay program. And so each year they put it out. They ask for a new quote on that rollover contract. And if it exceeds the budget that they have targeted for it, they don't go out and rebid the program. They maintain their maximum flexibility, and they'll adjust the scope of work for the work to fit the budget that they have. Yeah, it sounds simple, but we see some agencies that will either shelf the project if this is a capital project until they can go back out and find more money, recognizing that if they shelve it for a year or two or three, those escalating construction costs, the project almost becomes unobtainable if you keep pushing it out. But maximizing flexibility, work with the dollars that you have. Another key to success in maximizing flexibility is give the contractor maximum flexibility to complete the project, meaning increase the work hours that they have available on the project. If it's a night project versus a day project, talk with them as part of a partnership meeting about the ability or the impact of closing a major intersection and doing the work in one weekend as opposed to drawing it out over 4 weeks and doing it in a phased implementation. Maximize your flexibility for program delivery to increase the flexibility to stay on target in budget. Another takeaway that this comes from the American Public Works Association is make sure your agency is paying your invoices on time. Make that a priority. Most of the people in our industry are not, this doesn't even hit their radar. They say, listen, Mike, I'm a project manager for my city. And when we close out one of our projects, I approve the invoices and I send it out. We're ready. We pay it on time. That's not the problem that I'm talking about. What happens here as those invoices are approved, they go from the Public Works Department over to your agency's accounting department, where they might sit in an accounts payable basket for 90 days because they can. And that's where your agency may start to develop a reputation as a slow pay industry. I can give you an example of where this has happened, where I got a call from an agency years ago, and they said, Mike, all of our neighboring cities around us are all getting 3 to 5 bids annually on our mill and overlay program. We only get one. What's going on? Why everybody else is getting the same amount of work right here around? What's so different about our agency? And I said, do you want the rainbow and roses answer, or do you want the real answer? They said, no, please tell us the real answer. And I said, your city has a reputation of slow pay. So there's enough work across the network that some contractors are just opting not to work for your city because you don't pay the bills quickly enough. Or if they do it, they're giving you a courtesy bid and they're bumping their price by 10% because you are a slow pay agency. They had never heard that before. They had no idea that their agency had that reputation. So the public works director went and worked with the accounting department to address that. So they've made some inroads to do that. So something that I just want to share with you that can and does have an impact on your procurement. Make sure your accounting department is getting out your accounts payable invoices in a timely manner. So I said I was going to share a situation with you about deferred maintenance, and this is a common case that I'm sure everybody who's on our webinar today has run into. But here's the situation: your agency, we're seeing increased costs, less revenue, and your state, your city, your county has a resistance to tax increases. They don't want to do it. So your decision makers, not your program managers, not you that are on the call today, but the people that are making the decisions, make low profile budget cuts. They do the easy stuff, and that's typically in the form of deferring maintenance. Let me give you an example of a city that did this and the situation that they put themselves in. This was the city of Colorado Springs. That's Pikes Peak in the background there. Many years ago, the ASCE, American Society of Civil Engineers, went through and rated this they as part of their annual report card, and the city of Colorado Springs had the 24th worst road conditions in the country. 61% of their streets needed to be completely resurfaced or reconstructed. There you go. That's backlog. 61% of their network was in a backlog condition. Remember I said 15% plus or minus is a general rule of thumb. They're 4 times that. So they were not going to get themselves out of this condition at their current funding level. The takeaway that I'm sharing with you here, look at the picture in the background. Look at those potholes. This was common for their residential street program across the city. They continue to decrease their preventative maintenance budget for a decade. Again, look at the picture. This was the news department that went out and did this story, and these were residents that were taking cobbles out of their garden and filling the potholes in front of their homes so they didn't blow out a tire or mess up their alignment in their car. These were homeowners taking it into their own hands to fill in their potholes. It's getting worse. Our infrastructure is going into a nosedive at a noticeable rate. Things were getting really bad in Colorado Springs. Here's what happened. In 2008, we're going back several years, but the concept is the same, is that we had an economic downturn and the city had to make severe budget cuts. And that's what the dark green line was the line item in the city's budget for their deferred maintenance. They thought they were going to be okay with that because they were going to have an offset with that light blue line. That was a different funding agency that they thought was going to pick up the deferred funding, so they didn't expect to see a drop off in funding. That's not the way it played out. Their chief financial officer for the city said, listen, during an economic downturn, one of the things we do is reduce across the board. All departments take a budget cut. That's one way to do it. A different way to do it, and here's the best tip, is for an agency. This happened to be an agency in the Denver metro area. When they went through the same economic downturn, this was a county, they sent a survey out to all the staff within the county, to all the residents within the county, and they said, here are our 42 county services, departments, agencies that we provide for you as residents and staff. Please rank them in order of 1 to 42, that we see the most important services that we provide to our residents of the county. And they went through this quite elaborate process to rank the county services. Of interest, the top 3 services. Number 1 was snow removal. Number 2 was road maintenance. Number 3 was road construction. The 3 most critical services for that county were all road related. So what the county did, instead of just saying all counties have to take an 8% budget cut, they tiered them. And they said, we're going to take our top 8 services, no budget cut. You are our critical services to our residents. You are going to take a budget cut or a minimal budget cut. Now, number 9 through number 30, you're going to have to offset those top 8 because of our critical services. So instead of taking a planned 8% budget cut, you're going to have to take a 16% budget cut to do that offset. And then the third tier, they took a massive budget cut. They were deemed non-critical services by the county, and they took almost a 30% budget cut. So that's another option to do that and reprioritize what your agency is doing and the critical nature of your streets program or your road and bridge program. They are digging themselves out of the hole in Colorado Springs, and the way they did that was they passed a sales tax initiative, and it generates about $50 million annually that has to be spent on their road program. So they do have this new program that's gone through a couple of different iterations now, and they are having some success, some serious success moving forward. But when you break the dam and all of a sudden you take your line item budget and increase it by $50 million, that's a whole nother set of problems. A good set of problems to have, but managing those contracts, managing the inspection, managing the procurement, managing the testing, it's a whole nother issue of getting a windfall of funding like that. So how do we share this message with your elected official? These are the people that are determining the success or failure of your program, determining an asset value of your network. Another back of the napkin application. I talked about earlier, you can't fill the hole until you know how deep it is and where it is. What is the value of your asset? How many lane miles do you have? How many square yards or square feet of material do you have? And how much is that worth? You should be able to answer that question. And again, it's a simple calculation to go through that process, go into your GIS system and ask them to give you the total number of square yards or square feet, however you want to track it. And they'll go find a recent bid for work that was done by your agency for a common or a typical reconstruct project. Take that line item cost that was in that bid and multiply that by the total number of square yards or feet that you're managing in your network, and you're going to come up with a really big number. It's supposed to be really big. That is the asset value. That's the reconstruction value of your network. It's probably going to be in the several hundreds of millions of dollars. That's a sunk cost that your agency has spent over decades to build and maintain. Your elected officials should know what that number is. That's a big, big number. Demonstrate your current conditions and future needs. This is a core key component of your pavement management program. How do you do that? You implement a transportation asset management system, and I'll share a highlight on how to do that here in a minute. But poor decisions made at the top, meaning your elected officials, will significantly set back your transportation department. The staff who control the effectiveness of your program have no technical expertise relating to what we do. So that's why it is so critical you as a champion at your agency share the right information with these decision makers. The asset value. What's our condition? How are we doing this? I know this happens on an annual basis. You share these information, street report card, but has that made an impact at your agency? Or do you keep doing the same thing every year? You keep pulling up this, opening up the same report card, change the data a little bit and share that. Has that made a difference? The answer is probably no. So start thinking about how you can do things differently, what message you can share differently, or what you can add to your message to try to make an impact. Local agency best practice, cities and counties, where across the country, this is the significant drive. This is the breadbasket of the industry. This can be over 40% of tonnage or 40% of work, industry work across a state. The DOTs are the largest individual owners of a network across state. But once you add the cities and counties together, they're the ones that have the largest impact on the industry. So if your industry, or if your agency does not have an asset management program, here's a quick snapshot of what you need to be doing. It can be very complex. It can be very simple. The level of technology does not dictate the success of your program. Let me say that again. The level of technology does not dictate the success of your program. There are lots of agencies that have very robust pavement management, asset management programs, very robust data collection programs where they hire consultants or they do it internally with vans with lasers and LiDAR and on automatic crack detection. That's all high quality data. But you don't have to do that to still maintain a successful program. I've been there, done it through the 35 years of my career where you can still be successful going out there and walking a network with a clipboard and a wheel. Now, it might take a little bit longer, but the success of your program is the commitment to your program. The commitment and having an internal champion. It's not the technology. Technology just makes the life easier, but you can still be successful. And that's another topic of how to implement a pavement management system. But remember the postcard I shared for you earlier, keep the good roads good. Here it is in practice. So once you've done your asset survey, you know how much of your network are into the green, yellow, or red conditions. Good, bad, fair. Now, your agency, you're going to set your own numbers, and these are on a sliding scale. It may be a PCI metric. It might be an RSL, remaining service life. That's up to you at your agency how you're going to make these definitions. But what is important is the numbers, the percentages over here on the right side of the screen. Keeping the good roads good. We're trying to do everything we can. Forget about increasing funding. Let's operate with the funding that we have. How do we keep roads from falling into that backlog condition? I'm not talking about improvement because we can't improve until we address the funding problem. How do we keep roads from slipping into backlog? That's a prime focus. Keep the good roads good. So you're spending, out of your budget, you're targeting 35% of your annual program, roads that are already in good condition. You're trying to keep them in good condition. Roads that are in fair condition, those are your minor to major rehabilitation, but not reconstruction yet. You're putting 45% of your budget to that. So between the yellow and the green, that's 80% of your budget that you're spending to keep the good roads good. You're putting 80% of your budget to keep roads from sliding into that backlog condition. It's an upside down triangle. And you're putting 20% of your budget into backlog conditions, roads that are reconstruct. Now you're going to tell me, Mike, there's no way we're never getting out of that backlog at 20%. And I would say, you're absolutely right. You're not. Remember what I said, You're not going to get out of that 15% backlog condition at your current funding level. The only way you get out of those, you make a dent in your backlog condition, is you have to address it through funding. So at the meantime, the dollars that you do have, make sure you're impacting, you're getting the highest ROI possible on that, keeping the good roads good. Target 80% of your budget to keeping the good roads good. Now, one other tip that I've seen that has been very successful with agencies, and I like to share this example, is discretionary spending. So let's start with 100% of your budget before you get into this breakdown that I'm sharing on the slide here. If you take 100% of your budget and you do an 80-20 split, meaning I'm going to take 80% of my budget, I'm going to follow my plan, I'm going to follow my program. But I also know that I have squeaky wheels, and I also know that every year I have projects that float to the top that have to be addressed for some reason, but they don't fit my plan. That's discretionary spending. So some of these agencies I see very successfully right off the top, they do an 80-20 split. 80% of my budget is going to follow the program. 20%, we're still spending the money, but we're going to spend it in a discretionary fashion. The people that are complaining the loudest are the ones that don't fit our program. So this 35, 45, 20, this is in that 80% of the house that we're talking about. Another tip that might work for you, how you prioritize your spending at your agency. So I like to ask these questions of cities and counties and DOTs. I'm going to pick on the city of Indianapolis just because it's the first one that comes to mind. But here's the question. How many interstate highways is the Public Works Department for the city of Indianapolis responsible for building and maintaining? The answer is 0. Now flip that around. How many local streets or cul-de-sacs is the Indiana Department of Transportation responsible for building? Again, the answer is 0. The reason I ask that question is so then why would the city, any city, ever use a state DOT specification for their roads? State DOT specifications are built for heavy highway, horizontal, heavy civil projects to carry interstate traffic. The local roads that we looked at earlier in the city of Colorado Springs are never designed for that, and vice versa. So as a city or a county, here's another best practice specification, is use a specification that is tailored for a city or a county. I see too many agencies across the country that say, well, if it's good enough for our DOT, it's definitely good enough for us. But I'll go back to that example. They're building a different product than you are at your city or county. You might not have access or resources to those products that are developed specifically for local agencies. That's what I'm sharing with you on the slide here. This is an entity, the Municipal Government Pavement Engineers Council. And if you go onto their website, you can I think they have 30 plus specifications there available for download for free that you can take to your city or your county. Take the MEGPEG logo off, put your city county logo on. They encourage that because they just want to promote the practice of distancing yourself as a municipal agency from your DOT. You should be doing things differently. Here's one way to get there if you don't have that resource within your individual state. So we're getting close to wrapping this up here. We'll save time for a couple of questions at the end. Making the case for sustainable road programs. Remember I said the success of your program is going to lie on decisions made by your elected officials. So don't defer maintenance. Deferred maintenance is the arch enemy of sustainable infrastructure. And when I say sustainable, I don't mean green. I just mean quality, maintaining quality infrastructure. Deferred maintenance is the arch enemy. Involvement of elected officials needs to be managed. Now, I recognize that is easy to say, very difficult to do. But if at least you recognize the problem, that's half the battle. Put together a plan on how you're going to engage your elected officials. You're going to share that information with them and shepherd them in a direction, share the information to try to make an informed decision. Citizens can help with this process. If they ultimately make the decision that we do need to address our backlog, we've got to get we're over 15%, we've got to do that. Citizens can help with that and support your local chamber of commerce, etc. If your city or your county or your agency does ultimately elect to do something to address your funding issue. Crack sealing, most cost-effective maintenance strategy you can do out there. If you remember one thing from our webinar today, that's it. Crack sealing is the most cost-effective thing you can do at your local agency. Has the highest ROI. It has a very short service life, but it also has a very small cost per unit to do that. It needs to be done on a regular rotation, but it has the highest ROI. Make sure you have a strong commitment to your maintenance program at your agency. So everything I've been talking about here for the last 50 minutes can be summed up in this one slide, and this is why I like to close with this slide. Here we are in Connecticut. The center line where we're standing is the city limits. Bridgeport, Connecticut is on the left. Fairfield, Connecticut is on the right. In 2004, they signed an IGA, or an intergovernmental agreement, to do a curb line to curb line mill and overlay. And they split the cost down the middle. So they went in and did a 2-inch mill and overfill, 2-inch mill and fill along the length of this program, or project. This picture was taken 10 years later after that mill and overlay. Picture was taken in 2014. You can see up there in the corner. In the 10 years since, the city of Bridgeport hasn't touched the project. They walked away from it. The city of Fairfield has a little bit different perspective on it. 6 years after that original mill and overlay, they came in and continued with their crack seal program and a microsurface program. Look at the difference in performance. Again, we're back to our comment. Keep the good roads good. Here it is in practice. This is the one slide you can share with your officials. We're keeping the good roads good. This is why we're focusing and targeting 80% of our budget. 35, 45%. That's an 80% to keep the roads that are good in good condition. Everything we're doing at our current budget funding level is trying to keep our road from backsliding into backlog conditions. Bridgeport, Connecticut, they've got their hands full in this condition over here because they're deferring maintenance. I mentioned to you that here's the screenshot, so I'll leave this up here for a minute for you if you need a screenshot for our PDH, but I do want to thank you for joining us today.